Hey, welcome back to Allison Customs Project Car TV. Today I'm working on a C-10 fender. So this is off the Scott's 1970 C-10. And it's in pretty good shape. Now it has had some rust damage and body damage down here in the front corner on the bottom. Which, luckily, because the truck is so low, you're not going to see a whole lot of this, but we do need to fix the holes. It has had some... I'm going to go with previous owner damage. I don't really know. Somebody has cut out the support in this fender so that the truck would drop lower, you know, and the tire would fit higher up in here. And that's fine. We were going to have to do that anyway. Two problems. They cut the fenders differently, so we're going to have to, and took out some of the mounting points that we need on the passenger, or on the driver's side rather. This is the passenger fender. So for now, we've got to do some work on this fender. Now, I've added some tabs for the inner fenders that we got from Vendetta. I don't know how you say his name. Sorry, Jason. Anyway, we've got some inner fender kit that I started installing, and I kind of had to stop because the passenger door is in pretty rough shape where it meets the fender. So I'm going to have to pull that door. I'm going to mark it because I've got it to where it's hanging correctly, but the door has got a lot of damage to it. So I got to rework it or reskin it. I'm not sure which. I'm going to hopefully be able to rework it, get it straightened out enough that we can do our, continue on. If I have to get a skin, it'll take a couple of weeks, and then we'll get it on. It won't take a few hours to put it on once it gets here, but we'll see. But anyway, so I've got the tabs. Those are going to stay. But part of the problem I'm having is the fender kind of just flexes all over, and it's because we don't have any real support in here, and we've got enough rust in a couple places that the support that is here is kind of not doing its job. So things we're going to do, we're going to come in, and I'll get a close-up here, but we're going to come in and work on this front corner. And there's a dent on the outside skin, so while we're working on this, we'll just get it out of the way, fix the dent, fix up some old welds that were put in there that are just a bunch of booger welds. We'll get all that cleaned up, fix this. We'll come in, we'll put some support back here, and what I'm thinking I'm going to use is a piece of 1-inch flat bar, probably like 11 gauge, maybe 14 gauge in here. I don't think I have any, so I'll probably have to go get some, run to the metal shop. The holes where the bolts go into the body, those have been wallowed out so many times and in such weird directions that it takes a giant washer to cover the hole so I can even kind of get the fender to mount right. I did get it fit, but the holes are just slotted all over the place. So we're going to close up 90% of the part we don't need. We'll leave ourselves a little adjustment, but we don't need an acre. And then over on this edge where the support rolls into where the fender rolls into the support, it's all rusted out and misshapen. So we've got to essentially just cut the lip off and weld in a new lip, weld everything up tight. So it's not a lot of work. If you didn't have welders and all the other stuff that I've got here, it would probably be worth just replacing the fender. This up here is rusted through. We've got it all blasted out and cleaned up, but the metal is it's paper thin right here now. So we're going to have to rebuild the bottom of the fender, rebuild the support. Not a lot of it, just a chunk of the support. The nice thing is because it'll be out of the way while we're doing some of that is we can get the dent out of the inside of the fender. So now that we're in nice and tight here on this fender, you can see where this is all just paper thin. These should be, I believe completely that this was a separate piece from the fender, but there's no lip in there anymore for the fender to actually attach to. So we need to come back in, get this piece out of the way, straighten up the fender here, fix the dent that's on the bottom side, and a few other dents in here, rebuild the side of the fender, rebuild the bottom of this support so that it rolls behind it so that there'll be a place to weld the two together. Then we can put this back in and this corner will be done.
Well, my microphone got unplugged when I moved to the camera this time, and so it's about 6 minutes from now before we get audio back. In the meantime, what I'm describing here is that we've got this lip that's so damaged and it's kind of bowing out because of the rust pushed up behind it. So we're going to cut that lip off and replace it and clean up the metal behind it. As it turns out, the brace itself is in good shape. So we just need to do the 6 or 8 inches there up to the 2 marks I made just above my hand and right in there. And then we'll replace that lip and clean everything back up. And then we can always, if we need to, go back in and add some more metal or take some off so that the gap on the fender and door will look right. Now here we have the holes where we mount the fender to the truck, and you can see how they've been slotted out, terribly large, and takes a giant washer to cover these. So we're going to fill these in. Now the one closest to me, that is double thick. It's basically 2 pieces of 16 gauge, and we're going to clean that up. And this is the bracing that I'm going to add, and I'm just demonstrating with that ruler. We're going to use some 1x material and then weld in those tabs a little better so that that gives a nice finish. We'll do that all the way around. And here we are taking that access or that panel off that had rusted out at the bottom, just using a panel splitter there to get rid of the welds. And here it is. You can see where the whole bottom of that is all rusted out. Bottom of the fender is rusted out. Now just using a hammer and dolly to try and straighten as many of the dents out as possible. We've got dents on the inside, and you can see all the welds that were there from previous work. And here we have the patch that I've made to replace everything, and you just kind of have to hammer and dolly all that stuff into place. I left a little bit bigger gap than I really should have here, so we got to fill that in, but we'll get it. And then as we finish welding this, we'll weld it all the way around. Just keep working the hammer and the dolly just to make sure everything stays nice and tight together. And you can see I burned through a little bit there and then had to weld up some more, but it's all coming together pretty well. And I'm just filling in that big giant gap there in the end, and then we'll trim this to match whatever we need as we grind off the welds and finish the panel out. Kind of the basic shape. I'm just guessing here, but we end up taking quite a bit more metal off than that, but at least we don't have a sharp corner to catch ourselves on. And I like using a block of wood occasionally as a dolly just because it's a little softer so you don't stretch the metal as rapidly. And here's just where there's those other welds that were down in that panel, and so I welded up a bunch of holes that were left behind, and I'll grind those off. And that actually took quite a while because it was quite a bit of welding and a mess. Now this panel you'll see again later on here. At this point I was thinking I was just going to try and repair this by putting a flange on it and fixing the few things, but it was so thin that welding on it was just going to be a lot more work than making a new panel. All right, and here we are back to the holes that we were repairing, and I just made out of 16 gauge metal, I just made a filler for the inside. And then I make, here in a little while, I make a second one for the other side of that hole. Now the forward hole where my hand is covering right now, that one is only 1 thickness of metal, so we can just do it with 1 piece of 16 gauge, and you'll see me working on it. And here I am getting the second piece in place and welding that in. And then opening the holes back up so that we can actually get the bolt in there and have a little bit of movement. We don't need a whole lot, certainly not as much as that other was providing. And here's how I got my shape. I just scribed it out on a piece of metal. And here's where we're repairing the support panel at the back of the fender. So I've already repaired the lip. You can kind of see some of the weld work there. And we'll just cut this piece out and weld a new one in. And there'll be a little bit of hammer and dolly work to get it done, but it goes pretty quickly. This was probably about a 20-minute job to do all this. And again, using the rotary tool that we had a recent Tool Bag Tuesday on, and the cordless tool is doing a fine job for me, so I really like that tool, and there'll be a link for it in the description. Here we are starting to weld in the new metal, and I went with I think some 14 gauge here where I repaired it, just to give me a little more metal thickness so that as I weld, I can add quite a bit of heat and get a nice weld all the way through that penetrates really well. Same thing, just a lot of spot welds, and then we'll come back and grind those off. And once again, I left a little bigger gap towards the bottom there than I really should have, so it takes a little more effort to get it all filled in, but we get it. Grind that off. And I like these roll-lock wheels. These are 40 grit, so you really got to stay right on top of your weld. Don't get off on the original metal, which is also why I use that 14 gauge, because it gives me plenty of thickness there that is I can grind into or out of that patch, and it helps to have a new one on there so that you can use the edge of that roll-lock wheel to get right down in that groove in the where I welded that seam together. So here I just had a few spots that were either little holes or just pockets in the weld, so we want to clean that up. Nobody's ever going to see this again. We're going to coat this anyway. Right, so we've just about got this fender repaired up. It's we need to make this piece. I've decided I'm just going to make a new one and trim it accordingly. Let's see, mark. So we'll be cutting this corner off a little more. You get probably a piece of 18 or 20 gauge, probably 18 because it'll be easier to hand form. We'll get this made using this as much of a pattern as possible. Get it welded in. Got a few little high spots I need to clean up in there. And when we make our new one, we are going to add a drain hole or two so that we don't hopefully have this problem again of stuff collecting in here and rusting. Okay, so I grabbed a piece of 20 gauge and just using the other piece marked off where there's a little lip in here so that sits behind this piece back here. I think rather than putting a lip on here the way the factory would have had it, I'm just going to weld it to the piece I've already put in, and then we'll grind the weld down. And we just need to put this bend in it. So the bend starts right about there and ends right about there. Not quite a 90. So we'll find a piece of pipe or something we can roll this over. This detail where there's basically a bend line there, right there, and they kind of come up something like that. So I think we can put these on the finger brake, roll this side using the finger brake, and then put some bends in there. Okay, it's taken about 10 more minutes. Okay, so I went over and put a brake on the two lines I drew that kind of represent where the other thing had this triangle piece working. And then for the curve, I just put it on the edge of an anvil, on the anvil horn, and hammered out the curve so that it would be pretty smooth. And kind of in the process of that, figured out that what's going on is as it comes over to this lip, it needs to have a pretty hard breakover, and that's why they had those in there rather than just being all curved. So I'm going to clamp up, I'm going to put one more hole right here, clamp this in place, get this side welded up, and then I'm pretty close on this side. There's some curve here that I don't have, but I think once I have this side welded, I can clamp in a few places on this edge and begin kind of just hammer forming it into place, and I think it will all come together pretty quickly then. So we'll give that a shot.
Ideally, we'd like to get in and weld this from the inside, and if we can, we will. But I'm running this welder pretty hot, at least for the thickness of the metal I'm welding, so that it will hopefully get a nice penetration that'll be all the way through. Here's one for you. How many of you recognize the error I made in that process? I'll give you a second to think about it, but time's up. I welded this outside, and then, knowing I was going to want to weld the inside, I ground this down, which took away all the weld I had, you know, except for in a few little spots. And then I tried welding the inside. Well, now I've got nothing backing it, and so I burned through in quite a few spots. So had I left this weld on the outside, done my weld on the inside, and then come back and ground this, I wouldn't have had that problem. Would have saved all this extra welding. So lesson learned there. Now that we got the weld taken off, we can round that over. Because we have weld on the inside, that's going to continue to hold it together. I'm not putting a big edge on it. It's certainly smaller than the factory, but it's not a sharp edge. So it looks much closer to the way the factory would have had it. I believe that's it for this piece. I think we did a pretty good job of duplicating and repairing this whole fender. Or duplicating that piece and repairing the whole fender. Alright, now, last thing I want to do is drill probably just 2 holes here and here, and then I'll bevel that out or make it so that water can come out of there. It's not just a straight hole. So we're going to actually cut a slot and then bevel it out. There you go. Now we have a nice little lip. The same thing here. Basically, I'm making a louver. Hopefully those will make sense to you when you see them. Let's go hang this fender just to see if it fits. Actually pretty good right where it's at. Got to get this body line lined up a little bit. Like I said, I may have to still got to put some kind of bolt in there, or a nut zert, or cut all that out and put a new nut in there, which I'd have to go in probably from this side where I was putting my electrical, or from under the dash side. But you can see it's kind of tight down here. It's a little fat right there. I may end up adding a little more material right there, just so I could clean that edge up. But really, once the fender comes up just a hair, we're going to get our gap right. So it's pretty close to where it needs to go. The fender needs to come up a little bit to line up the body line. So it's going to come up right in there. And then over, and then I think the front of the fender is going to need to come up just a little bit.